Welcome back to the Motivated Mind Zone. Glad to have you here. I want you to just take a moment today, step back, and observe yourself. Think about those tiny, almost automatic habits you have. Maybe it's how you instantly grab your phone the second you're in a queue, or that feeling of slight panic if you're suddenly alone in a quiet room, just you and your thoughts.
Yeah, that silence can be loud for some people.
Exactly. Or maybe it's that specific little ritual before a big meeting,
Yeah.
wearing that lucky charm, maybe avoiding a certain path to the office. They feel so insignificant, almost like harmless quirks.
They really do feel that way, just part of who we are. But our deep dive today is going to look at these seemingly tiny things through a pretty challenging lens.
Okay.
We've pulled together quite a stack of compelling psychological research, and it suggests that many of these common everyday habits, they might actually be pretty reliable signs of, well, mental rigidity or maybe cognitive laziness, kind of resistance to really digging into complex thought.
Wow. Okay. That sounds fascinating and maybe a little bit uncomfortable, which honestly is probably a good sign we're onto something interesting.
Ha! Maybe so.
So our mission today, this deep dive, it's all about sources focusing on these behaviors, these cognitive shortcuts that psychologists are actually linking directly to uh, a lack of critical thinking or maybe lower intellectual agility.
Right.
And we really want to move beyond just listing behaviors that, maybe don't look great. We need to understand the why, what's driving them.
Exactly. What are those underlying psychological gears turning? Is it a preference for instant gratification? Is it this kind of systemic avoidance of mental effort that's, cementing these patterns in our lives?
Yeah.
That's really the core idea here. The material we're looking at frames these daily actions, things we often just label as personality traits, like you said, as signs the brain is consistently taking the path of least resistance, cognitively speaking.
The easy way out.
Pretty much. We want to show you exactly where the brain kind of decides to check out, take that easy shortcut, even if it's illogical, and how that can actually, stunt intellectual growth and our ability to think critically.
Okay, let's do it. Where do we start?
Well, let's jump right into where logic seems to just evaporate. The failure to tell the difference between a real cause and just, well, coincidence.
Ah, okay. Like magical thinking.
Precisely.
Okay.
We're talking about those specific behaviors, right? The lucky socks for the game, avoiding walking under ladders, believing certain colors bring money, essentially living life as if luck or superstition is running the show, not, actual cause and effect or your own effort.
And the research says this isn't just a cute quirk.
Not according to this analysis, no. It's
Hmm.
linked pretty directly to low critical thinking because fundamentally the behavior bypasses the need for any actual evidence. Well, the underlying mechanism is the brain confusing correlation. Two things happening around the same time with causation, one thing making the other happen. It's a cognitive error, sometimes called patternicity or the clustering illusion.
So let's say I wear I don't know, my old college sweatshirt, and my team happens to pull off a miracle win that Sunday. My brain just instantly goes, aha, it was the sweatshirt.
That's the tendency, yes. It latches onto that one instance.
And it completely ignores the, 100 other times I wore the sweatshirt and they lost.
Yeah.
Or just the basic probability of winning or losing anyway.
Exactly. It's a form of confirmation bias, maybe taken to an extreme. The brain is sort of wired to find patterns. That's useful sometimes. But when critical thinking skills are a bit low, it just grabs the first exciting pattern it thinks it sees, doesn't really check the stats.
Hmm.
Smarter minds, or maybe just more critical minds, tend to pause. They ask that fundamental question, okay, wait, is this actually repeatable? What's the real evidence here?
Whereas lower intellectual agility just skips that
Yeah.
step.
It skips the effortful part, yeah. It relies on the hunch, the charm, the feeling, because frankly, it's cognitively cheaper. It takes less mental energy to believe in luck than to analyze probabilities.
Okay, but hang on. Isn't there sometimes a psychological benefit? Like, if I believe my lucky socks help, maybe that belief actually lowers my stress just enough that I perform a bit better. Is there any validity to that idea?
That's a really important point, and yes, there's truth to it. The ritual itself might offer a temporary placebo effect. It can help manage anxiety, absolutely.
So it's not totally irrational.
Well, the effect on anxiety might be real, but the intellectual cost is still there because the person is fundamentally outsourcing their sense of agency, their responsibility to an external object, right? A pair of socks.
Ah, I see. So you're saying my success depends on this thing, not on me?
Essentially, yes. You're implicitly admitting that your own internal resources, your preparation, your logic, your skill aren't enough. And this reliance, it actually stops you from analyzing the real factors that influence success. So even if you do well, you might attribute it to fate or the socks, not to your own adaptation or what you learn. You don't learn the right lesson.
Okay, that makes sense. So if relying on external luck is one shortcut, what's next? You mentioned inflexibility.
Right, the refusal to adapt. The sources call it blind adherence and inflexibility.
Mm.
This is the person who follows instructions to the absolute letter, even when the outcome is clearly, sometimes comically, absurd.
Right, like the IKEA example.
That's a classic one. It's presented not as discipline, but as mental rigidity, and that's a crucial difference.
Explain that difference. Discipline sounds good, rigidity sounds bad.
Discipline usually means following a necessary procedure because you understand the reasoning behind it, the long-term benefit. Rigidity, on the other hand, is the inability or maybe the refusal to adjust the plan when reality throws you a curveball, when things don't match the instructions. And that is a fundamental failure of critical thinking and adaptability.
Okay, so the examples they give are pretty stark, aren't they? Like trying to force a screw into thin air because the diagram says it goes there.
Exactly. Or serving food practically raw because the recipe said bake for exactly 20 minutes, even though you can see the oven wasn't hot enough or something went wrong.
Why does this happen? Why stick to the plan when it's clearly failing?
Well, the research links lower cognitive agility pretty strongly to this kind of rigid thinking. Dealing with complex, unexpected situations requires a lot of working memory, right? You have to hold the original plan, the new contradictory information, and synthesize a new approach. That's hard work.
So the rigid mind finds that too taxing.
Essentially, yes. When the plan hits a snag, the cognitively agile mind processes the new data, recalibrates, maybe invents a new path forward. The rigid mind finds that processing effort too demanding. So it just pushes harder on the original flawed instruction.
Instead of questioning the instruction itself.
Right. The internal monologue is something like, the instructions must be right, I must be doing it wrong, instead of, hang on, maybe these instructions don't apply here, or maybe they're just plain wrong.
And this isn't just about following manuals for furniture, is it? This rigidity bleeds into other areas.
Oh, absolutely. It shows up in how people manage their beliefs, their routines, their relationships. That my way or the highway attitude.
How so?
When they're confronted with new information, maybe a better way of doing their job, or even just a different political viewpoint, the rigid thinker often just shuts down instantly. Their brain seems to prioritize stability and certainty over, well, accuracy or improvement.
So the automatic response is just, nope.
Pretty much. It's that's not how we do things, or I've always believed X, so X must be true. There's no space for considering the new idea.
So it's not really an intellectual disagreement. It's more like a defense mechanism against complexity.
That seems to be the psychological root, yes. An inability to tolerate uncertainty or ambiguity. Adapting means acknowledging your previous knowledge might have been incomplete or wrong, and that's cognitively uncomfortable for some people. It requires effort.
So the rigid thinker just clings to what's familiar.
It's safer, mentally speaking. Change demands that mental wrestling. So if your immediate knee-jerk reaction to anything new is just flat-out rejection, the sources argue you're not really maintaining wise principles, you're demonstrating intellectual stagnation.
Okay. And this fear of mental wrestling, this desire for certainty, that probably explains the next point too, right? The appeal of simple narratives, especially things like conspiracy theories or superstitions.
Absolutely. It's the comfort of the easy answer in what feels like a messy, complicated world.
It's the ultimate mental shortcut, isn't it?
It really is. Think about a complex event like an economic crash.
Yeah.
Was it, decades of deregulation, global market forces, complex debt instruments, all interacting? That's
Yeah.
hard to grasp.
Very hard.
Or was it one shadowy group pulling all the strings behind the scenes?
The second one is much easier to understand and maybe more exciting.
Exactly. It's dramatic, it's simple, it provides a clear villain, it gives the overwhelming, complicated world an immediate kind of satisfying meaning, even if it's wrong.
So the brain just prefers that story.
The sources really emphasize this idea of the brain being inherently lazy, in a
Yep.
sense. It has an effort aversion. It will almost always prefer an exciting, simple, dramatic narrative, a single cause, over the messy, difficult fact-checking process of analyzing objective truths and weighing contradictory evidence.
So believing in things like, say, flat Earth or some of the wilder theories about vaccines, it saves mental energy.
It does. And critically, it stops people from engaging with the actual, often solvable issues. Because why bother digging into the complex reality if you've already accepted a simple, emotionally resonant explanation?
And the justification becomes just, I saw it online, or someone I trust told me.
Right. It provides this illusion of knowledge without the actual burden of doing the research, of weighing evidence, of critical thinking. Smarter minds, or perhaps minds more practiced in critical thinking, tend to understand that real world problems are almost always multi-causal. They require deep, focused analysis.
Whereas lower intellectual agility just grabs the first comforting story.
It settles for the narrative that feels good or confirms existing biases, often amplified by online echo chambers. Because the perceived cost of digging for actual facts, wrestling with ambiguity, is just seen as too high. And this habit prevents the development of complex problem-solving skills. You never practice if you always accept the first easy answer.
Okay, that covers how we handle evidence, or fail to. What about how this shows up in how we interact with others? Section 2 focuses on communication, ego.
Right, and how that intellectual resistance manifests socially. A big one is how people try to mask a lack of actual substance. Let's talk about that classic phenomenon. Confidence without content.
Ah, the Dunning-Kruger effect in action.
The living embodiment, yes. This is probably one of the most visible indicators we're talking about. The person who speaks really loudly, interrupts constantly, lectures everyone with great authority on subjects they actually know very little about.
Using volume to make up for lack of knowledge?
Precisely. Their confidence is the performance. The substance is often minimal or just wrong. It's really a mechanism to hide, perhaps unconsciously, a profound lack of depth.
So the aggressive confidence isn't genuine self-assurance, it's more like a shield.
That's a great way to put it. The Dunning-Kruger effect itself states that people who are the least competent in a specific area are often the most likely to vastly overestimate their own competence.
Why is that? Why don't they realize they don't know much?
Because fundamentally, they lack the metacognitive skills. That's the ability to accurately assess your own knowledge and performance. You need a certain amount of knowledge just to realize the extent of your own ignorance. They don't know enough to know what they don't know.
Okay, that explains the lecturing. But what about the other side of that coin? I've definitely noticed that some of the smartest people I know are often the most hesitant to declare themselves experts.
That's the crucial flip side of Dunning-Kruger. The more skilled and knowledgeable you become in an area, the more you start to appreciate its true complexity, the nuances, the potential pitfalls, how much more there is to know.
So expertise breeds humility.
Often, yes. Highly competent individuals, precisely because they understand the landscape better, are often more prone to underestimating their own abilities relative to others. Some call it imposter syndrome. They see the vast terrain of what's still unknown.
So the truly sharp mind is busy analyzing, asking questions.
Admitting when they're unsure. Meanwhile, the individual confidently holding court is often too busy lecturing to actually learn anything new.
It really sounds like humility isn't just, a nice personality trait. It's almost an intellectual necessity for growth.
I think that's a fair assessment based on this research.
And this inability to accurately assess oneself, or maybe just a refusal to admit a lack of knowledge, that seems like it would lead directly to the next point: poor listening habits.
It does connect very strongly.
The sources suggest this isn't just about being rude, right? It might be linked to actual cognitive fatigue or difficulty.
That's the critical cognitive link the research points to, yes. Real listening, active listening, is an intensely demanding mental process. It's not passive.
What does it involve?
It requires sustained focus, decoding language in real time, integrating the new information with what you already know, critically evaluating the speaker's points, tracking their argument. It's a lot of work.
So symptoms like interrupting constantly, talking over people, or that classic thing where someone nods along but you can tell they're just waiting for their turn to talk.
Or forgetting what was just said moments ago.
Yeah,
No,
those aren't just bad manners.
They are bad manners, but the underlying cause might be the brain essentially tuning out because it finds the processing effort too demanding, too cognitively taxing.
So the impatience, the interrupting.
Yeah,
It might not even be boredom necessarily. It could be the brain struggling to keep up.
it could be. Or, perhaps more commonly, the brain is focusing so intently on preparing its own response, its brilliant rebuttal, that it literally has no cognitive resources left to actually process what the other person is saying right now.
Ah, okay. So 90% of mental energy is on, what am I going to say next?
And only 10% on what are they actually saying. The material suggests this inability to sustain attention during complex or effortful speech is a marker of weaker comprehension skills.
But how do we tell the difference? I mean, sometimes conversations are genuinely boring or repetitive, and anyone might tune out a bit.
That's true. You have to look at the pattern. Is this happening consistently? Do you find yourself regularly unable to follow detailed explanations? Do you immediately forget the key points of almost any discussion that goes beyond a few minutes? That's more of a red flag. Smarter people, or at least people motivated towards intellectual growth, tend to recognize that they can potentially learn something from almost anyone. So they try to engage actively.
So constantly refusing to listen, interrupting, cutting people off. It's like refusing to learn.
It's a profound refusal to grow, in a way. It signals that the individual values their own immediate verbal output, getting their own point across right now more than any potential insight or knowledge they might gain from actually hearing someone else out.
That aversion to mental effort, it also seems to define the next point: the avoidance of depth, and this idea of low need for cognition. What does that mean exactly?
Need for cognition is a psychological term. It basically describes a personality trait reflecting the extent to which individuals are inclined towards effortful cognitive activities. Someone with a high need for cognition enjoys thinking, wrestling with complex ideas, solving puzzles.
And some with a low need for cognition.
They tend to avoid mentally taxing tasks. They prefer simpler problems, simpler answers, less effortful thinking. And this often manifests in conversation, specifically in sticking to chronic small talk.
Ah, okay. The weather, the traffic, what you had for lunch.
Exactly, that kind of surface level chat.
Yeah.
It's the lowest common denominator in conversation, cognitively speaking. It requires minimal processing power, minimal intellectual engagement.
Now, wait. We all need small talk sometimes, right? It's a social lubricant, helps break the ice with new people.
Absolutely essential in many contexts, no question.
So when does it cross the line from being a normal social tool to signaling something more, like this lack of intellectual curiosity?
It's about exclusivity and duration. When small talk becomes the only mode of communication, even with people you know well, colleagues, friends you've had for years. If you can spend hours with someone and literally never move beyond the surface, never discuss an idea, a challenging concept, a book you read, a genuine question about how things work,
Then it suggests they just don't have an appetite for anything deeper.
it signals they are consistently prioritizing cognitive comfort over intellectual engagement. They simply don't enjoy the act of wrestling with complex ideas, so they stick to the mental equivalent of, I don't know, elevator music. Pleasant, requires no effort, but ultimately empty.
And that same avoidance of effort, that low need for cognition, it probably also fuels that knee-jerk reaction we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
instantly dismissing new ideas.
It connects directly. The moment they hear something that's even slightly outside their current frame of reference, boom, the reject button gets pushed.
That's dumb. That'll never work.
Those exact phrases, it's almost like an intellectual reflex designed purely to avoid the mental labor involved in actually considering the idea.
What labor's involved?
Well, think about it. To genuinely consider a new complex idea, you need to use cognitive resources. You have to imagine scenarios, maybe calculate potential risks or benefits, test it against what you already believe, see if it fits or requires you to change your model. That takes work.
Whereas just saying, nope, stupid idea is.
It's free. Cognitively speaking, it's the easiest choice available. Zero effort required.
So they're basically deciding the effort isn't worth the potential reward before they've even spent 10 seconds thinking about it.
That's exactly what seems to be happening. The unwillingness to even temporarily hold a contradictory or novel idea in your mind for consideration is seen as a marker of, well, maybe intellectual cowardice or at least profound laziness.
F. Scott Fitzgerald had that quote, didn't he, about holding two opposing ideas.
Right. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. The intellectually lazy, or those with low need for cognition, immediately shut down that possibility. They opt for the comfort of rejection to avoid the mental wrestling that real analysis and potential innovation requires.
Okay, this is making a lot of sense. So if our brain is the tool for all this critical thinking, the final section seems to focus on habits that actively sabotage that tool itself, starting with something huge, chronic sleep neglect.
Yes. This is where people almost wear sleep deprivation like a badge of honor, isn't it? Bragging about functioning on 4 hours, mistaking self-sabotage for, I don't know, hustle or productivity.
It seems almost heroic in some circles.
It does, but the scientific reality is just brutal and undeniable on this one. Consistent lack of sleep profoundly damages basically all aspects of cognitive performance: your memory consolidation, your attention span, emotional regulation, and especially complex decision making, which happens in the prefrontal cortex.
And the analogy in the research is pretty stark. They compare functioning after an all-nighter to being legally drunk.
It's a functionally accurate comparison in terms of cognitive impairment, yes. When your brain is starved of that essential slow wave sleep and REM sleep, crucial processes like synaptic pruning, cleaning out the connections, and waste removal just don't happen properly. You end up with cognitive clutter, reduced efficiency.
So it's like trying to run complex software on a dirty, overheating computer.
Excellent analogy. Intelligent people, or at least those who value their cognitive abilities, tend to view their brain as their most valuable asset. They treat sleep as non-negotiable, mandatory maintenance.
Whereas treating rest as optional is.
It's symptomatic of a kind of lower intellectual agility, according to these sources. A failure to grasp that direct physical link between adequate rest and optimal mental performance. You simply cannot run complex mental operations effectively on an empty, unclean tank. It's self-defeating.
And if the brain isn't rested, the last thing it probably wants to do is that heavy lifting of quiet reflection. Which brings us neatly to the next point, avoiding time alone, that need for constant stimulation.
This is a really powerful one and maybe often overlooked. You see it clearly in people who exhibit almost a panic response when they're left alone in silence. They immediately reach for a screen, turn on music or the TV, call someone, anything to avoid just being with their own thoughts.
Why is that seen as a red flag for cognitive agility, though? Couldn't it just be that they're very extroverted people?
It likely goes deeper than just introversion, extroversion personality types. The psychological perspective here suggests that minds geared towards intelligence, or at least deep thinking, often actively seek out and prefer solitude sometimes.
Why?
Because solitude provides the necessary mental space for deep processing, for synthesizing different ideas you've encountered, for focused reflection, for problem solving. That's the truly effortful mental labor.
And the constant stimulation.
The endless scrolling, the background noise, always needing to be around people. It's viewed potentially as a coping mechanism, a way for a brain that struggles with or dislikes that heavy lifting of introspection to avoid it. Silence forces you inward.
And introspection can be uncomfortable.
It often involves confronting difficult truths, unsolved problems, maybe ambiguities you haven't figured out. And the effort-averse mind seeks to avoid that discomfort at all costs.
So the constant phone checking isn't necessarily about connection. It might be more about distraction. Distraction from having to process complex internal stuff.
That's precisely the argument. If your attention is constantly pulled outwards towards external stimuli, you're failing to cultivate that internal mental environment that's required for critical analysis, self-awareness, and ultimately growth.
And that need for immediate external hits of stimulation or reward. That sounds like the foundation for the next point. This short-sighted life, dominated by instant gratification.
Yes, this pattern is everywhere, isn't it? Choosing the junk food now instead of cooking a healthy meal later, buying things on credit now instead of saving up, dropping important work for that quick dopamine hit from scrolling social media.
It feels good right now.
Exactly. But this perpetual chase for the immediate reward is highlighted as a classic indicator of a failure in long-term planning and self-regulation, which are hallmarks of higher cognitive function or intellectual power.
Whereas smarter minds are better at delaying gratification.
They excel at it, generally speaking. They can tolerate discomfort or effort now for a bigger, better, more substantial reward later. They seem better able to mentally simulate future outcomes and weigh them against present desires.
And there's solid science on this going way back, isn't there? Like the marshmallow test.
Oh yeah, the marshmallow test findings are absolutely foundational here. For listeners who don't know, young children were offered one marshmallow immediately, or two if they could wait alone in the room for a short period without eating the first one.
And the results were pretty predictive.
Remarkably so. The children who demonstrated that ability to delay gratification to wait for the two marshmallows were tracked for decades. And on average, they tended to have significantly better life outcomes later on, higher test scores, better financial stability, even better health metrics.
Wow. So that ability to resist the instant urge is tied to something fundamental.
It's directly linked to executive functions, primarily housed in the prefrontal cortex. Things like planning, impulse control, working memory. Constantly chasing the quickest fix is basically living life short-sightedly. It demonstrates that the brain's immediate primal desires are consistently overriding any calculated long-term strategy.
That short-sighted, dopamine-driven mindset seems like it would feed directly into passive consumption and just following the herd, too, spending hours on autopilot.
Right, like excessive TV watching, endless doom scrolling on social media,
Yeah.
just letting hours melt away while the brain is basically switched off in mental autopilot mode.
Is downtime bad, though? Don't we need to switch off sometimes?
Of course, downtime is necessary, but excessive passive consumption is viewed here as cognitive stagnation. You're not using your brain to learn, create, solve problems, or even just reflect meaningfully. And worse, the neuroscience perspective warns that constant rapid-fire scrolling actually trains the mind.
Trains it how?
It trains it to crave those short, frequent bursts of dopamine. This fundamentally alters the brain's attention mechanisms. It makes it progressively harder to engage in deep, focused, effortful tasks later on, things like reading a challenging book, writing something complex, or sticking with a difficult problem until it's solved. You're effectively conditioning your own attention span to be perpetually fractured. That's a scary thought. And if you're
Yeah.
stuck in that passive autopilot mode, you're probably not doing much critical thinking about your own identity either, which leads to blindly following trends.
Exactly. This is the herd mentality in action,
Mm-hmm.
which, again, is the ultimate cognitive shortcut when it comes to figuring out who you are or how to behave.
Vow so.
If you're constantly changing your identity, your preferences, your behaviors based solely on whatever the latest social media trend dictates, suddenly adopting new brands you never cared about,
Mm-hmm.
filming yourself doing silly dances in public because it's a thing.
Yeah.
It's often a sign that the individual has outsourced their critical self-reflection. They haven't done the internal work to figure out their own values or preferences. Instead, they conform. They follow the crowd because it feels safe, it offers instant belonging and validation.
So it avoids the effort of asking, wait, do I like this? Does this align with my values? Or am I just doing it because everyone else is? Precisely that question. When your behavior shifts dramatically based on weekly or even daily social media mandates, it signals a profound lack of critical thinking about your own internal architecture, your own self. Smarter minds, or perhaps more self-aware minds, tend to establish core preferences and values, and then they adapt more slowly, based on deliberate assessment and genuine interest, not just the safety of the herd.
The herd offers that immediate acceptance, but it saves you the effort of creating a unique, maybe more authentic self.
That's the trade-off, yes. Comfort versus authenticity, often driven by cognitive ease.
Okay, brings us to the final point in this deep dive, which feels like a perfect metaphor for everything we've discussed.
All right.
Repeating mistakes, especially in activities that require effort, but don't seem to lead to improvement.
Yeah, the example used is often someone playing video games for hours and hours, right?
Right. They put in the time, but they keep making the same tactical errors. They ignore the lessons from previous failures, and crucially, they blame external factors.
It was the lag. My teammates were useless, the controller's broken, just bad luck.
Never. Maybe I need to change my strategy.
Exactly. This is presented as life's ultimate frustration loop, but also a sign of cognitive non-adaptation. True dedication, real intellectual growth in any skill, involves actively picking up on patterns, analyzing why things went wrong, the causal links, and then consciously adapting your strategy based on that failure.
So if life or work keeps giving you the same feedback, you're struggling in this area, your plan failed here again, and you consistently ignore the need to change your internal approach.
That's cognitive refusal. You're refusing to learn from experience. The blame is always projected outward onto the game, the boss, the market, the lag, never inward, where the actual adaptation needs to happen.
So you can put in hours of effort, but if your brain isn't processing the feedback,
Your effort is largely wasted. You're exerting energy without the crucial intellectual investment of learning and changing. True brain power, this research suggests, isn't defined just by the hours you put in, but by your ability and willingness to extract knowledge from mistakes and adjust your approach for the next try.
wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
From, lucky socks all the way to sleep patterns and blaming lag in video games. When you pull it all together, what's the main takeaway? What's the central thread connecting all these habits?
I think the central theme that emerges really strongly is this. All these habits, in different ways, are manifestations of the brain taking the easy way out. Prioritizing immediate comfort, simplicity, instant gratification over the harder work of effortful analysis, dealing with complexity, and thinking long-term.
They're all shortcuts.
They're all cognitive shortcuts, exactly. Designed to make life feel more manageable or less demanding right now. But they come at a significant cost, the cost of genuine intellectual growth, critical thinking ability, and ultimately maybe more effective problem solving and adaptation.
But the good news, maybe the empowering part of this, is that these aren't fixed personality traits, are they? They're described as cognitive habits, things we've learned and practiced.
That's the crucial point. Habits can be changed. Recognizing where we fall into these patterns, where we choose the exciting story over the messy facts, or opt for shallow chat instead of deeper conversation, or trade vital sleep for one more scroll, that recognition is the absolute first step towards reversing that lazy cognitive instinct.
So how do we reverse it?
Well, it seems to require introducing intentional friction. Since so many of these detrimental habits stem from this fundamental refusal to just stop, pause, and reflect, avoiding silence, avoiding truly listening, avoiding effortful thought, the solution probably lies in mandating that reflection.
Forcing the brain to do the work it wants to avoid.
Exactly. We have to consciously train the mind to engage in the kind of thinking it naturally shies away from, build those cognitive muscles.
Okay, so that leaves us with a really important question for you, the listener, to maybe chew on after this deep dive. If real brain power, real intellectual agility requires patience, adaptation, and that sustained mental effort, what's one small, maybe slightly uncomfortable but intentional act you could introduce into your routine starting today?
Mm.
Maybe something like committing to really listen without interrupting in your next important conversation, or deliberately sitting in silence for just 5 minutes without reaching for your phone. What small step could you take to immediately begin rebuilding those critical thinking muscles?
Because ultimately, the universe probably isn't waiting for your lucky socks to align. It's more likely waiting for your focused, effortful, adaptable thought to engage with it.
That is a profound thought to end on. Understanding these hidden mechanisms feels like the real shortcut to becoming more intellectually agile. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into our own minds and habits.
My pleasure. Always fascinating stuff.
We'll catch you next time on the Motivated Mind Zone.